Wild water racing is a discipline of canoe sport in which the object is for a competitor to demonstrate his mastery of his boat in fast-moving wild water, while racing a prescribed course in the shortest possible time. In this film, we shall be seeing the different classes of boat that are used, the paddling techniques required, and the training necessary to improve one's performance. All the boat classes used in competition are strictly governed by international regulations regarding dimensions, hull shape, and methods of propulsion.
3, 2, 1, go!
The three classes used are the C1 or single canoe raced by men only, the C2 or double canoe which is raced by 2 men or a mixed crew, and the K1 or single kayak which is raced by ladies or men in separate events. The C1, sometimes also known as the single Canadian, is paddled adopting a kneeling position using a single-bladed paddle. However, in the kayak, the paddler adopts a seated position and uses a double-bladed paddle as his means of propulsion. The wild water racer, before he embarks on a rigorous training program, must ensure that he is moving his boat along as economically as possible. With a good technique, no energy is wasted, and the paddler can put his maximum effort into drawing the boat forward. It would be foolish to expect every competitor to paddle exactly the same. However, there are certain principles that all paddlers should follow. One of the first requirements of good paddling is a comfortable seating position. The body should be upright in the seat with plenty of freedom of movement from the waist upwards. When the paddle is placed in the water, ideally, the arm should be straight at the elbow, and the paddle must then be pulled back as close to the boat as possible with the whole blade being covered. It is important that the paddler can obtain body rotation in order that he may reach as far forward as possible. Throughout the whole stroke, it is important that the body is not too tense, even though the effort may be great. Even the hands may relax and open, as gripping too tightly restricts circulation and causes problems with the muscles of the arm. A good kayak paddler will pull his paddle back as close to the boat as possible, without allowing his top hand to travel too far across the center line of the boat, the pull with the bottom hand finishing level with the hips. Ideally, the top hand should finish level with the face, not crossing the center line of the boat. An inefficient technique can often be detected in the pattern left in the water by a swinging stern. It is very important that the arm does not swing too far across the boat. This can create a sweeping action with the paddle, causing the boat to snake. The further the paddle is away from the boat, the less efficient the action. The C1 creates different paddling problems. Usually the paddler will propel himself using the paddle on one side only. However, the same basic principles apply to C1s as to kayaks. paddle must be pulled back as vertically as possible and as close to the center line of the boat as possible. It is usually personal preference that decides on which side the C1 is paddled, and does not affect the technique that is used. However, some courses may slightly favor one paddler or the other. Some paddlers will, in fact, switch from side to side in order to keep the boat straight, but the majority of paddlers will introduce a steering element into their forward paddling stroke. This involves a slight pushing of water away from the boat on the exit of the paddle. To create this effect, the blade is turned away from the boat by raising both wrists when the paddle is level with the hips. This has the effect of a slight rudder action on every stroke and counteracts the tendency for the boat to turn away from the paddling side. Referred to as the J stroke, this is in fact an integral part of the paddling action when executed properly. An additional aid to paddling straight is a slight lean away from the paddling side. From the rear, it can be seen how closely the paddle is pulled along the side of the boat. The effectiveness of the J stroke depends on how upright the paddle is during the stroke. Any tendency to sweep the paddle will mean that a much stronger steering element is required, wasting valuable energy that might otherwise be used to drive the boat forward. With the C2 class, the steering problems are not so great. However, the secret is in the synchronization of the two paddlers in the boat. Both paddles should enter the water at the same time, and the paddling rate should be such that the rear person has time to steer, if necessary, without breaking rhythm. The paddlers should both rotate from the hips without too much lean, and they should place their paddles in the water with the bottom elbow as straight as possible. The top elbow should be slightly bent to enable the paddler to obtain the vertical position needed with his blade. The power in the stroke is initiated from the trunk and utilizes the muscles of the back and shoulders rather than those of the arms. Steering the boat is a team effort. The backman is generally more effective at keeping the boat in line. To do this, he utilizes the J stroke when necessary. Because his line of sight is sometimes obscured, the front man is in a better position to see and avoid very close obstacles. It is essential that the body is rotated to gain forward reach, as any excessive forward lean or rocking by the paddlers will cause the boat to bob up and down, thus wasting energy and causing loss of speed. For all classes of boat, one will find that the smoother the paddling action, the smoother the boat will run. The C1 is the most technical of all the classes and is certainly the hardest class to race, which makes it unpopular with many. Being propelled by a single paddle, it is no match for the speed of the kayak, which is propelled by two. Nevertheless, all the classes in wild water racing have their enthusiastic followers. It is important that much time is spent on developing the forward paddling stroke. A faulty stroke or too many correction strokes during a timed run will only result in lost time. The same applies to C1s, but again, the boat is much harder to control on the agitated water. The paddler must work very hard to maintain forward movement. Some examples of lost time can now be seen. To steer his boat to the left, this next paddler is finding it necessary to correct on that side. On 2 occasions, this K1 paddler has to miss strokes and back paddle in order to maintain his direction.
C1s, go forward.
Wild water racing requires many varied forms of training.
3-1s, go!
Firstly, we shall look at interval training.
Go!
This is a form of training in which there are alternate effort and rest periods. The paddlers will work for a specific time or distance and recover at the end of that period for another specific time or distance. The fitter the paddler, the less recovery time he will require between each effort. It is important that the effort is 100%, but carefully timed, so that fatigue does not set in too soon in the training session.
Easy. Just turn it.
This form of training is required for developing the heart and the lungs, and is known as cardiovascular
Minute left to go, fellas.
or stamina training. During the rest period, the paddlers must compose themselves for the next effort, which again must be total to obtain the maximum effect from interval training. The rest period is very important.
Okay, next session, 5 seconds to go.
Restarting too soon or resting too long could both be to the detriment of the paddler. A fit paddler is able to restart a lot sooner than a less fit paddler. In any case, any lengthy waiting around can result in too much cooling down and perhaps injury to the muscles. In a group training session, the coach must try to gauge the fitness of his paddlers, and he must train the group on a basis of average recovery. For the individual, the monitoring can be much more controlled.
As hard as you can, and back here to finish. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Come on, hard.
Interval training can be very tiring, as a session might require many separate efforts, totaling up to 45 minutes. This could make a session last up to an hour and a half.
Come on, that's good. Keep it going. Okay, easy. Easy. Over here. Okay, relax. Quite cool.
As this form of training is based on heart rate recovery time, monitoring of the pulse rate is an essential factor of an individual's training.
How's that? Okay.
The effort should be carried out with the heart working at 160 beats per minute or more, and the next effort should commence when the heart has recovered enough to beat at a rate of about 120 beats per minute.
Let's go back here when you finish. 3, 2, 1, go! Keep it long.
Even
keep
though
it
the
long,
paddler
come on.
is working at maximum effort, it is important that his stroke and his body position do not deteriorate too much.
Keep it long.
As can be seen from the facial expressions, interval sessions are extremely demanding and leave the paddler in a state of exhaustion.
That's good. Push your pedals. Just climb out. That's good. Okay, fine. Relax.
A final check of the pulse rate finishes the session for the day. Keeping a record of his pulse rates from week to week will give the paddler a good general indication of his fitness, but must only be used as a guide for the individual to monitor his own improvement.
That's good. Right head. Pump bottom.
The warm-up is one of the most important and one of the most neglected factors in training and racing. Before the paddler attempts any hard effort, he must ensure that his muscles and joints are well prepared.
Change. Tops.
All the muscles and joints that are to be used must become accustomed to working through their full range of movement.
Yeah, stay loose.
The forms that a warm-up takes are many and varied. The muscles of the arms and legs must be stretched, but not too vigorously. The joints must go through their full movement.
It's not a race, just a warm-up. Okay, ready to go?
It is also important that the heart rate be raised in order to provide the supply of blood necessary when training begins in earnest. Another very important method of monitoring performance is in fact a form of training in itself, the time trial.
5 seconds, 4.
In simulated race conditions, with the slowest person starting first and the fastest last, it is very good motivation for the slower paddler to avoid being caught by the person behind. Or it is equally valuable to the faster person in that he has someone in front of him whom he should try to catch.
15 seconds, Nosha. Now listen, you must catch him by the halfway, sir. You must get it. Okay?
Using the time trial, the paddler and his coach can plot progress and see how much improvement there has been during training.
3, 2, 1, go!
This form of training, however, should not be an end in itself and should only be used once every couple of weeks. The time trial is, however, a very good method of putting the paddler under pressure, similar to that of a race, and can enable him to work under pressure for the same duration as a race.
Go!
The boats here are started in the order C1, C2, K1, as it is usual for a C2 to be faster than a single Canadian, but noticeably slower than a kayak. On current form, it is expected that John in the kayak will be the first paddler home in this 20-minute time trial. With a start time 2 minutes after the first person off, John will have to work extremely hard to make up this deficit. However, his training over the past months make him favourite to return first. Because of the nature of the event, in that the competitor is working alone against the clock, he must be extremely well motivated and conditioned to drive himself to his limit. Having no one around him so that he may judge whether he is winning or losing, the wild water racer must pace himself finely in order that he can give the event the required effort for the necessary time. Taking the race easily from the start and saving energy for the finish can be as disastrous as starting too hard and having nothing left. Often with no one in sight in front of him and no indication of his progress, it is sometimes very easy to slacken off the pressure without realizing. As expected, John Adamu is the first paddler to approach the finish. The C2 has managed to overtake all the single Canadians, but has only made about 35 seconds on Kenny Hunt. These extremely warm conditions are using up vital body salts, and the distress resulting from this can be seen on several of the paddlers' faces. Not far behind, a very exhausted Darren Gould has paddled exceptionally well for a 15-year-old. He has held off Graham North, who has only managed to gain 20 seconds on him. It is important that serious competitors have a well-balanced food and mineral intake during the periods that they are training hard.
Yeah, Nosh.
During the training session, it may be necessary to take in extra salts and minerals in liquid form that have been lost during the training
Not
session.
too fast. Just gently, slowly. How'd you feel?
Not bad.
It was a good session. Good session.
My arms are knackered though.
Same again now, on the way back.
It is equally important that paddlers' eating habits are regulated to include a high intake of starch-containing foods. These are the source of his energy in racing. It is also important that alcohol is stopped and sugar in excessive quantities avoided immediately before an event.
Just relax. How's your arms?
The physical and mental well-being of the paddler is also essential for good performance. The competitor must be fit medically, and he should try to ignore or avoid any external pressure that may upset his daily rhythm.
Don't get no rope.
Of course, training can have its light-hearted side. It is important that the competitor is enjoying his training and his canoeing. He should get pleasure out of his sport at all times. If he is not enjoying himself, then he might as well be doing something else. Good club spirit is imperative. Friction within a club will cause much harm, whereas a good camaraderie between the old and young will reap great rewards. There is no substitute for experience. A lot of time in a paddler's development can be saved if advice on gaining this experience can be passed on through the generations of paddlers. Discussions about training are invaluable, as the same problems often recur time and time again in different individuals' training. Being a competitive sport, one always tends to look at and talk about the expert's technique.
You know who's knocking? There's another fellow, he's number 3.
Kenny Hunt, a paddler who has achieved great success by training in this urban canal environment. Through his club having many visits to races abroad, he has observed the best in action and tried to copy accordingly. Whilst it is not essential for the club coach to be an experienced and competitive paddler, it is usually to his and his club's advantage if he has a deep knowledge of the sport and can draw from his experiences and his contacts with the other canoeists. As well as the paddlers keeping fit, it is important that their skill levels in their boats are always adequate. Rowing, for example, is such a skill and can be practiced in the swimming pool before or after a club swimming training session. On land, there are many alternative forms of training. Interval running sessions similar to those on the water are a useful aid and sometimes a welcome change in training.
Easy. Back we come.
Always, though, it is the amount of time spent in a boat that counts. So one must not become too dependent on running, swimming or weight training to produce better results.
3, 2, 1, go! Come on, hard!
One of the most important functions of the club coach is to ensure that his club paddlers are moving their boats efficiently. If they are not efficient and fast on the flat, then they will never succeed on the rough.
Come on, Nosha, that's good. Come on, harder. You can do harder than that. Lengthen that arm. Come on, reach for it. Reach. Come on, pull, pull. Reach and pull. Come on, rate slightly higher, Nosha. Come on, higher strike rate. Come on, come on. That's good, much better. Get the revs up. That's good. Much better. Fine. That's good. Come on, Darren, straighten those arms. Reach forward. Come on, straighten your arms and twist. Twist, reach. Reach, that's better. Straighten those arms. Straighten them, top arm higher. Come on, straighten those arms. Pull hard. Good lad. Come on, Kenny. Paddle higher. Paddle more vertical. Come on, harder. Longer. Come on, Kenny, head up, head up. Paddle vertical, that's better. Much better.
It is always very difficult, if not impossible, for the paddler to analyse and criticise his own technique and performance. Another person, film or video are all essential ingredients of technique development.
That's good. That's good. Keep it going. Come on, John. Sit up straight. Come on, John. Upright. Rotate. Come on. That's better. Much better. Come on, keep it going.
Practice in many types of water is invaluable, whilst it is not a complete substitute for paddling in rapids. Tidal water can present the paddler with problems not encountered on the canal. Change of environment for training can ease the monotony sometimes experienced by training on the same stretch of water day after day. Tidal water is a very useful resource, often available to the wild water racer. The uneven nature of it can simulate conditions that produce similar reactions in a boat, and handling is consistent with that required on a rapid river. In the second part of this film, we shall be seeing the techniques involved in negotiating down a rapid river, and how these techniques are acquired and practiced beforehand.